And Brittany looks frozen. Okay, we'll get back to her. Okay, so welcome back. And today is, can you see, day 123. And we just got news today that the bad news that a bunch of the captives have been declared dead. And I am waiting for names. I don't have names yet. I think the families are in the process of being identified. Today is also, it's evening in Israel. And it is the second yahrzeit, the second anniversary of the death of my mother, and my sister's mother, who's here with us today. It's Lisa. Lisa, can you wave? Say hi. And so I just want to dedicate our learning in her memory, and the way we do this is we say the Hebrew name. So our mother's Hebrew name was Tzippa Liba, and she is the daughter of Binyamin and Esther Malka. So her soul should have an elevation in heaven in accordance with our learning today. Brittany, are you back online? Can you speak to us? Yes.
You see me?
Yeah, you're
Okay.
very, like, maybe your internet's not so strong.
Yeah.
It's very choppy. Can you it's very broken.
I am a Texas native.
Brittany, I'm going to ask you to just, Brittany,
I
can you hear me?
lived in the...
Can you hear me? It's not clear at all. There's it sounds very tinny and delayed. We can't make out any of the words that you're saying. So we'll try it again later. Okay. Okay. Well, welcome anyway. We're happy that you're with us. I would like to start, as we have been the last couple of weeks, by sharing another letter. And today's letter is Gimmel. So you have here, the first letter is Aleph that we studied, and Bet, and Vet, and now we are going to talk about Gimmel. Gimmel is, as you can see, the letter that it's hardest to find in a Hebrew text because it appears the least frequently. And if you look at it, it a little bit looks like a man running. Can you kind of see that with like legs? And there's a teaching that it represents the the rich person running after a poor person to give them charity. And you'll see here that I wrote down that it first appears, the very first time we see a Gimmel is 16 verses into the beginning of the Torah in the book of Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 16. And it appears twice, Haggadolim here and Haggadol. Haggadolim is great. I'll show you, let me go down a little bit. Here's the translation of, and God made the two great luminaries, the great luminary to rule by the day and the lesser luminary to rule the night and the stars. So that's the first place you see a Gimmel. So if you are learning along with us and you are going through a Hebrew text every week and you are looking for these letters, it's going to be, I remember that Helen said she found the Aleph in like, I don't know, 40 times or something in a chapter of Psalms and chapter of Tehillim. So what I'd like you to do though is look at a Hebrew text and look for all of the Alephs that you can find and say when you find one, that's an Aleph or just Aleph. When you find a vet, and now we will add Gimmel. Okay. That is our little mini Hebrew lesson, Aleph, Bet, and Gimmel. So now you have the first three letters. And now, hang on, let me stop sharing my screen. You know, it does such crazy things when I do this. Hang on. Give me a second. I'm sorry that I'm took away my option to stop sharing. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here's the story. Last week, we spoke about King David. We spoke about the letter Bet. Also, we spoke about King David. And also a few of you, both in the group and later, mentioned to me about the book that I have long been delaying. And I want to talk about that. Okay. So today I'm going to teach you from one of the chapters that I actually did complete because it is connected to what we have been studying. Okay. We are going to study the story of Orpah, who is linked both to King David and to Goliath. And I need your help with something. Okay. Oh, Christy, you are also new. She was here just a second ago. Yes. Okay. Can you just unmute yourself before I go too far and just introduce yourself to us, please?
Hi, I'm Christy. I'm in Texas.
Did you want to elaborate in any way about what brings you here?
Donna. Donna invited me. Donna has been a house guest of mine. We met in DC and she has since visited us a few times.
Okay, so you know what we're about, right?
Well, I think she just said Torah study.
Right.
So
okay, so
I'm all in on anything biblical.
Okay, great. So we're going to go biblical today. Okay.
Okay.
So so here's the part where I need the help from all of you, those of you that come from a Christian background. And we're not going to do it now because I want to take time away from our learning, but I want to ask you to think about how you can help me with this. In a nutshell, when I finished this chapter, I gave it to what's called a beta reader, which is somebody who is like in the target audience of people who would read a book when it's finished. And I got a lot of harsh feedback. And the feedback was that since the commentary comes from rabbinic sources rather than biblical sources, that Christians won't accept it, basically. Now, the story of Orpah, as we go on, and you will see, it's pretty salacious. It's pretty scandalous in certain parts. And that might have made it more difficult to accept the Torah teachings for this. Here, okay. So basically what the feedback was is that Christian readers, and I know that this is an issue, and I know that some of you are a little further along the path of being open and willing to accept biblical commentary that comes from rabbinic sources. But basically, that's the issue, is how do I help people who came up through a Christian background to accept that Torah study includes the addition of the rabbinic tradition? Everything that I have taught you, I know, Ada, you're shaking your head like, I know that's a hard job, but I feel like you guys are the ones who can best advise me, because I need, and I know that I'm not going to reach everybody, but there are some people who are going to be open, and so just think about that and talk to me privately, or we can talk in the group, because I'm going to have to write an introduction. I've started it, but I don't feel like I've quite done the job of helping people who are interested in Torah accept that if you're going to learn Torah from Jews, or that is in the authentic way, you have to be open to the rabbinic tradition. Okay. So so it's a very challenging point when teaching Torah to people from a Christian background. You guys, I think by virtue of the fact that you're here, have already accepted, or at least are open to it. And you understand, you've already seen through 7 or 8 or however many classes that we've done, how much it adds to the basic biblical text when you have that additional foundation. And so I'm not going to say more about that, but I'm just gonna say that it's a problem with this book, not a problem. It's a challenge with this book that I need some help navigating. Okay, so I call this chapter The Forgotten Sister, Unearthing Orpah's Story, because whenever I tell somebody that I'm working on a book about women in Tanakh, or women who were not born into the Israelite nation of Tanakh, almost invariably people say, oh, you mean like Ruth, okay? Because Ruth is arguably the most well-known story of a woman born to another people. And there are dozens and dozens of books of commentary and thousands of Torah classes that focus on the biblical Ruth. So I'm actually not covering her in the book. But meanwhile, the story of her sister-in-law, Orpah, is that what you call her? Is that what?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes the names are, we call her Orpah also. The story of Orpah is hardly known. Orpah drops out of the biblical narrative 14 verses into the book of Ruth. And where the verse says at chapter 1, verse 14, they raised their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth cleaved to her. Okay, so Orpah kisses Naomi, sets out on a journey back to her mother's house, exactly as Naomi encouraged both of her daughters-in-law to do. And in the text itself, there is some measure of ambivalence that Orpah expresses. There are some tears, there's a kiss, she leaves the scene, and in the book of Ruth, we never hear from her again. But in classical rabbinic commentary, her story does not end here. According to the rabbis, something went tragically wrong the moment she turned away from Naomi. And that's the story that I want to share with you today. Okay, so let's go back to what we know from the beginning. In Shmuel Bet, the 2nd Samuel, Orpah is called Harafa in the Hebrew, okay? Orpah appears to be a nickname related to the Hebrew word oref, which means the back of something. So the name Orpah is associated with the moment that she turns away from Naomi, revealing the oref, the back of her neck, to return to her life in Moab. Okay, I'm assuming that you guys are familiar with the basic story of the book of Ruth, and I'm just reviewing. By the way, as an aside, because this often comes up when I teach this, Oprah Winfrey was actually supposed to be named, or she was named officially Orpah Gail Winfrey, but people mispronounced it so often that that's how she came to be known as Orpah. That's an interesting little tidbit. Okay. So according to our tradition, Ruth and Orpah were actually half sisters. They had the same father, and they were princesses in Moab, which you probably call Moab. They and the entire nation of Moab, descended from who? From Lot and his daughters. Remember the whole thing with the daughters of Lot, and they get their father drunk because they think they're the only people left on planet Earth, and they both conceive miraculously. Somehow they both conceive the first night. One of them gives birth to Moab, who what literally means from my father. Av is father, me is in Hebrew, Av, Moab, and Ammon. Right now we're just focusing on Moab. Ruth and Orpah's father was Eglon, who was the king of Moab. He was the son of Balak, who was also a king of Moab. Eglon persecuted the Israelites for 18 years until he was assassinated. And this is all described in the book of Judges, in the book of Shoftim. There's a recording of a small gesture in the life of King Eglon that actually has astonishing implications for the rest of it. So there's a hero from the tribe of Benjamin, named Ehud ben Gera. And he's a judge in Israel, and he has a godly mission to free the Israelites from persecution from the Moabites. Okay, so for 18 years, they're poking at us and annoying us and maybe probably more than that. Okay. So here's Ehud's great idea. He goes to visit Eglon, who was the king of Moab, who is the father of both Ruth and Orpah. And he announces that he's coming with a message from God. Now, I find this interesting because you don't see this very much in Tanakh, but Eglon was a very fat guy. And that's important because despite the fact that he was significantly obese, out of respect for the fact that Ehud said, I have a message from God, he stood to receive his word. And the Midrash teaches that the reward for standing in honor of Hashem is that he merited to have King David as one of his descendants. Now, Eglon was, besides being fat, he was not a good guy. I told you already that he was persecuting the Israelites for 18 years, okay? But the reward for that one moment of struggling out of his chair and standing up out of respect for the fact that Ehud said that he had a message from God was that he merited to be in the line of descendants to King David. Okay, so Eglon's daughter is Ruth, and we talked about this last week, right? Ruth marries Boaz. They have Oved. Oved has Yishai. Yishai has David. And so Eglon, King Eglon, this bad guy who's been like not good to the Israelite nation, is a great great grandfather. Okay, but what about his other daughter? Because today we want to talk about Orpah. So we understand that Ruth and Orpah are half sisters. They both are the daughters of Eglon the king, but we don't know very much. We don't know anything actually about their mothers. We just know that they grew up in the palace. They were princesses, and they were daughters of Eglon the king of Moab. Now, the other side of the story, and this is just the beginning of the book of Ruth, just to bring you back, just to bring these two things together. So there's a famine in the land of Israel, in Bethlehem, specifically in Bethlehem, which is spitting distance from where I'm sitting right now. There's this wealthy leader and this is the area, this is the area of Judah. Even today, this is the Judean portion of Israel where I live. And when you come to visit me and I show you the view from our back porch, you will see these are what we call the Judean hills. Okay. So in this part of town, in this part of Israel, there's this wealthy leader named Elimelech. And there's a famine in the land. And he takes his wife, Naomi, and their two young sons, and they flee to Moab, nearby Moab, in order to, they weren't so much fleeing because they were starving, but because, according to the tradition, Elimelech was afraid that his poor neighbors who had nothing were going to bleed him dry. This is not a particularly good look for, it's not a good look for any moral person, but it's really not a good look. The Torah does not have respect for that. And he pays a tremendous price in, as you know, in the story. But anyway, at this point in the story, he takes his two unmarried sons and his wife, and they flee to Moab. Okay. And the two brothers, who come from a prominent family because Elimelech is a wealthy leader, as I said, they marry these two half-sisters, the daughters of Eglon. Helen, I'm going to ask you to mute yourself because I'm just getting a little bit of feedback. Maybe it's
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay. They eventually marry these two half-sisters, but not until Elimelech passes away. Okay. So now if we look at the book of Ruth, actually, this is in a commentary. During his lifetime, the lifetime of Elimelech, according to the rabbis, the sons would not dare take Moabite wives. Elimelech would never have allowed it. Okay. But after he died, his sons basically intermarried. Now, King Eglon of Moab was already assassinated before these marriages took place. So there is no father on either side of these intermarriages to object. Okay. But the Torah says they married, the two sons, married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth, and they dwelt there for about 10 years. Now, the younger brother, I don't know what you call him. The younger brother is called in Hebrew Kilyon, and he marries Orpah first. Then his younger brother Machlon marries Ruth. This is one of the reasons why in this verse it says they married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. Why Ruth is mentioned, why Orpah is mentioned first in this verse, because she gets married. There's another opinion that her name is mentioned first in this verse in order to connect it to the words Moabite women, because as we'll see, Orpah never really gave up her identity as one of the Moabite women. Ruth is the classic symbol, and actually a lot of female converts to Judaism take the name Ruth because I guess they're, inspired by the devotion and the absolute change that Ruth made from being a princess in Moab to being part of the Israelite nation. Okay. And so some people say that Ruth is mentioned in this verse after Orpah because she broke ties with her Moabite upbringing. There's another opinion that's exactly the opposite, that says in Hebrew it says ha'echad Orpah, literally the one was Orpah, that initially Orpah was the spiritually greater of the two sisters. Now, we spoke last week about the law, the halacha, the law that women, but not men from Moab and Ammon were permitted to convert and marry into the Israelite nation. Remember that whole thing with Ruth and Boaz and the whole controversy over their marriage, and why Yishai was worried that his lineage wasn't pure because maybe his grandfather got the ruling wrong. This law is relevant here as well. So it had existed and it had been forgotten, or maybe it was not yet publicized in Israel. And so it took somebody of Boaz's stature to establish this halacha through his marriage to Ruth. So he made these marriages between Israelite men and Moabite women kosher, so to speak. Okay. So even though the brothers are not technically violating the law, they wouldn't have known that because they did this. That is, they married these two sisters before Boaz obviously marries Ruth himself and explains the or promote, what is the word I'm looking for when you when it makes this law very well known. Okay. So Kilyon and Machlon, these are the two brothers. Machlon's name is related to a Hebrew word, mechila. Mechila is forgiveness. If you want somebody to forgive you in Hebrew, you ask for mechila, you ask for forgiveness. And we Jews do this like in the time before like Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur time, because the tradition is that we are asking God to forgive all the ways that we went awry in the year, but you can't ask God to forgive you for what you've done wrong if you haven't apologized, if you've done something wrong to another person. So in Judaism, first we ask for mechila, we ask for forgiveness from people if we know that we've done something that's really been hurtful to them, and try to repair those relationships. Anyway, Machlon is related to mechila. You can hear it, Machlon, mechila, because he married the righteous Ruth and he was redeemed through Boaz. We're going to talk about that. Kilyon's name is related to the Hebrew word kliah, which means destruction, because he married Orpah. So that's a much less positive spin. Now, there's an opinion that since Elimelech's out of the picture, okay, Elimelech is the father, he's the husband of Naomi, and he's out of the picture because he's died, okay, that these two sons married into the royal family of Moab because they're trying to secure their social standing. They came from a prominent family now, and we know that Naomi loses everything. She doesn't have, like, two grains of corn to rub together at the end of this process. But the sons, but this is earlier yet, this is 10 years before all that. that that they're trying to kind of marry into royalty so that they can be part of an important family. Okay, so that's their way of staying on top of the social ladder. Naomi's Naomi herself is opposed to these marriages, but she doesn't, without her husband's backing, she has no real influence on her sons, and the marriages take place anyway. And there is a dispute over whether these two women underwent any kind of conversion before marrying Machlon and Kilion. But even if they did, it wasn't a sincere conversion. So even today, we have more serious conversions and less serious conversions. So some people who convert may have a conversion in a liberal part of the Jewish community, and maybe they studied for 6 months or something like that. Maybe they married a Jewish person and they want to sort of make it look right. That is very different than a full conversion that is done by Orthodox rabbis, where the person is fully committed to keeping Torah and mitzvot and so forth. So if there was any kind of conversion at all, which whatever that meant in those years, we know that Ruth's ultimate, more complete, sincere conversion came later, when she declared herself part of the same nation as Naomi. Okay, so Machlon and Kilion are also punished with death after 10 years of marriage. Their punishment, by the way, was not for marrying the Moabite women, but for lingering in Moab for 10 years when they should have returned to Israel immediately after Elimelech died. So they were young, unmarried men, or well, I'm not boys. They were probably boys. Let's say that, they got married in their early 20s. Time has passed. I don't know how old they were, actually. I'm just guessing, but they were old enough to have returned to the land of Israel, and they didn't. And they continued to live in Moab for 10 years after they married Ruth and Orpah. Okay. Now Machlon is eventually forgiven, and his name is perpetuated through this Levirate marriage between Ruth and Boaz. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. Let me just go through this a little bit. We are, by the way, going to get back to Orpah specifically because it's such juicy stuff, but I just want you to have like the full background. A Levirate marriage is when a man dies before he has children. And I don't know if there's a non-Jewish version of this. There could be. That he dies without children. His wife has a choice of either marrying his brother, and then their child is considered, however you understand this. This doesn't happen, by the way, anymore. It's not like a thing anymore in the Torah world, but it was a thing back then. That child is considered the spiritual descendant of the dead brother. Okay, there is a way for a woman to get out of that if she doesn't want to marry a brother. But if you think back to the story of Tamar, that after her first husband died, she married a brother, and then when he died, she was going to marry a third brother, and that whole story. Okay, so because Ruth does eventually marry Boaz, and she does have a son, that son is somehow connected to Machlon, and but Orpah, by marrying Orpah, Kilion is held accountable for causing his brother to sin, because he married first. Okay, so and the tradition is that Machlon actually tried to argue with his father about leaving Beit Lechem in the first place. He didn't want to leave, and he tried to argue against it. He was not successful, but he got some spiritual credit for that. Okay. Kilion is, again, related to the concept of destruction, because he is wiped completely out of the world, because Ruth joins the Jewish people, or the Israelite nation at that time, but nothing holy happens from the marriage of Orpah and Kilion. So God destroys him. There's no descendants. He's forgotten. Okay. let's go back to the scene. We're on the road with these three women. As soon as Naomi hears of the famine that sent them to Moab in the first place is over in Israel, she sets off for home. And there's a very famous, well, a lot of the book of Ruth is very famous. There's a very famous verse, chapter 1, verse 8, where once and then a second time she encourages her daughters-in-law to return to their original homes. And here's the verse. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go return each woman to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the deceased and with me. Return each woman to her mother's house. This is where we learn that although they are both daughters of Eglon and they're half sisters, they had different mothers. At this point, both Ruth and Orpah travel on the road with Naomi, and they are indistinguishable in their actions. Over the 10 years that they were part of the family, both Ruth and Orpah came to appreciate the Torah lifestyle that Naomi shared with them. And the Talmud indicates that both of these women intended to return with Naomi to the land of Israel and fully join her nation. What was the kindness that Naomi's referring to when she says, may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the deceased and with me? So Naomi comes from Bethlehem, from Bethlehem. She comes to Moab, a wealthy woman, a very admired woman, famous woman, a rich woman. I said wealthy already. Okay. And by the time Machlon and Kilion die, and her husband's been dead for 10 years, she has no money. She has no money to bury them. And Ruth and Orpah pay for the burial of their dead husbands. And they also waive their right to money for living expenses because Naomi's penniless. She's all that's left in the family. And widows would normally get financial support from the family of their dead husbands, but there's no money there. Okay, that's verse 8. In verse 11, she says to them a second time, and Naomi said, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they should be your husbands? That's that reference to the Levirate marriage, right? Even if I was pregnant today, Naomi at this point is an old woman. She's probably postmenopausal. She's not having any more children. But she says, even if I was pregnant now, are you going to wait 18 years until this child grows up so that you can marry this son of mine? The first two times that she's encouraging them to go, the sisters act identically. They both say, no, we're going to go with you. We're clinging to you. We're staying with you. And they keep walking with her. But something changes the third time that Naomi encourages them to leave her. She says, and this is verse 11, return, my daughters, go, for I have become too old to marry, that I should say that I have hope. Even if I had a husband tonight, we just spoke about this, and even if I had born sons, would you wait for them until they grew up? Would you shut yourselves off for them and not marry? No, my daughters, it is much more bitter for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. Here she's making a reference to the fact that when she came to Moab, she was this wealthy, prominent woman, and now she's like dressed in rags and penniless, and things have been hard on her. According to the Talmud, Naomi's 3 attempts correspond to the 3 times. Have you ever heard this idea that a potential convert has to be turned away 3 times, right? This is the source for that, okay? That if one were to go to a rabbi and say, I'm not Jewish, but I want to become Jewish, his job is to try to talk you out of it. And you should know that it's kind of unlike Christianity. Jews are not actively looking for converts, and we only want those people to join us. It is totally possible to do that, but we only want people to join us who are not easily discouraged and are very sincere. Okay, so when I am working with a prospective convert, somebody who comes to me and says, I really want to do this, I try to give them a heads up, because some people do get discouraged and don't understand that this is the way it's supposed to be done. Okay, but after the third time, Naomi's words finally impact Orpah, and she separates from the two women and she turns away. On one level, it's hard to blame her. She was a Moabite princess. She married into a wealthy family from Judea, and now her husband's dead. All of the wealth of the family is gone. Her own mother-in-law has insisted 3 times that she goes home, and twice she protests, and she continues to walk down this road with her. By the third time, her resolve breaks. Now, maybe it's because she thinks about how hard it's going to be for her to make Aliyah, for her to move to Israel. She's not even Jewish. She's not even an Israelite. She's got to go to a new country, a new culture, no prospects of finding a husband, because as we talked about, Naomi's too old to have any children. It's not hard to understand why she decides to turn around and return. And up until this point, it seems that both Orpah and Ruth love Naomi equally. But after a lot of prodding, Orpah ultimately accepts Naomi's advice, and she cries a little bit. And there's some expression of that this is not an easy decision for her. She kisses Naomi farewell and she turns away. Okay. And this is Ruth chapter 1, verse 19. They raised their voices and wept again, the women, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. Okay. And then the verse says, but Ruth cleaved to her. So there's one opinion that Orpah admired Naomi and the holiness of her lifestyle, but she didn't want to convert and take on the whole burden, what is called the yoke of mitzvot, the yoke of Torah, the burden of everything that's required to keep a Torah lifestyle. And ultimately, Naomi's insistence that she return to her mother's home prevailed. She doesn't desert Naomi as much as she chooses the best path for her from a pair of less than ideal options. You with me so far? Okay. That is one way of looking at it. However, our tradition, when telling what happened with Orpah after that, is kind of shocking. Jewish tradition explains that Naomi actually accurately assessed the relative spiritual levels of her 2 daughters-in-law, and she understood that Orpah somehow was not as spiritually strong as Ruth. And so before she sends them on their way, she kisses them. The kiss is intended, according to our rabbis, to blow into Orpah some of her own spiritual strength. Naomi understood she was leaving, and she was going back to an idol-worshiping society after having lived for 10 years in a Torah home. She wants to give Orpah some of what she needs to survive in the idol-worshiping society of Moab that she's returning to. That was the intention. Now, she also kisses Ruth. Naomi's kiss has a different effect on Ruth and Orpah. To Ruth, it elevated her soul. To Orpah, it made her realize that she's fundamentally different from Naomi and from Ruth. So Orpah's kiss, as she parts from Naomi, our rabbis understand as a rejection of the gift of Naomi's kiss. She's effectively returning all the spiritual gifts she's accumulated in the last 10 years living with Naomi and her family. She's rejecting all of it, including the God of Israel. So Orpah didn't just fade away. Instead, she ends up joining an enemy nation. And she gives birth to 4 giant sons who battle with the Israelites, as we will soon see. It's like at that moment, something snapped in Orpah. As soon as she turned away from Naomi and Ruth, 1 minute she's part of this holy triumvirate, this holy threesome of women who are walking in poverty toward an unknown future back in the land of Israel in Bethlehem. And in the next, she's portrayed as a highly sexualized, exceedingly immoral woman. So let me tell you what I mean by that. There's one opinion that as she turns away and she's like out of sight, she's attacked on her way home by a group of 100 men, and that she was violently gang raped again and again. And on that night, she conceived Goliath, who is eventually killed by a young King David. So we talked about this last week. Since Goliath is a son of Orpah and David is the great grandson of Ruth, David and Goliath are actually first cousins twice removed. Okay. There's an idea that just like when Jacob left Haran, it impacted the city. Naomi's presence in Moab influenced, well, while she was living there, it had a positive influence on Moab, and it encouraged them to rein in their immoral behavior. But once she left, they quickly reverted to this illicit conduct so that they would think this was a good thing. This was a good idea. Let's rape some random woman walking alone on the road. But there's another even more shocking opinion. And maybe this is good that like our group is only women, because this is okay. So the other opinion is that on her way home, she came upon a group of 100 soldiers, and she voluntarily allowed them all to have sex with her, that she wasn't raped, that she willingly participated. So these are the two opinions. And during this, whether it was a mass rape or it was an orgy, she conceives Goliath. There's even a teaching from the Talmud that the Goliath's name reflects the fact that his mother was either heavily promiscuous or had or was raped. But in any case, she had sex with a lot of men on the road there. The Talmud there continues that her given name, remember I said Orpah was like a nickname, was Harafa. She was called Orpah. I told you that it means the back of something. Earlier, we saw the opinion that Oreph refers to Orpah turning the back of her neck to Naomi, but the Talmud says that she's named Orpah for a much more shocking reason. And that is that the men entered her from the rear. Okay. So Rashi, the great biblical commentator, says that Orpah abandoned herself like an animal with one partner facing the rear of another. Some of you live on farms or whatever, but you understand what I'm saying. There's another opinion that states that on the same day, this is so gross, and I'm like a little sorry, but I find this story so fascinating that she also had intercourse with a dog. And there's a verse where Goliath says to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And this is the source of this. I'll tell you it is in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 43. So in the taunting that goes on between David and Goliath, Goliath says to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" Meaning, do you think my father was a dog? All right. Now, not only does Orpah fail to cling to Naomi and to the God of Israel, but according to the rabbi, she fell so far and was so promiscuous that even the Moabites rejected her. And so she went to live in the land of the Philistines, where she gave birth to these 4 illegitimate sons, all including Goliath, all of whom were giants like Goliath. The names of her sons are mentioned in the book of Chronicles, chapter 20. So she ends up giving birth to the enemies of the very people that she rejected. All of Orpah's sons, by the way, were killed by either King David or one of his officers. And there's a tradition that the Talmud relates that God said, "Let the sons of the kissed one," meaning of Orpah, who Naomi kissed when she said goodbye, "fall in the hands of the sons of the one who cleaved," which is a reference to Ruth. Okay, so these two sisters, there's like this ongoing multi-generational connection between them all through time. Even though the rabbis are not kind to Orpah's memory, there are opinions that she was actually rewarded for the kindness that she showed to Naomi when they were together. One opinion is that these 4 giant sons, who were very powerful, was a reward for the 4 tears that she cried when she departed from Naomi. Another opinion is that Goliath survived for 40 days in battle as a reward for the 4 tears that she shed before she walked away from Naomi. And another opinion is that Goliath standing against the Israelite army before David slew him with a slingshot was a reward for the 40 steps that Orpah took along with Naomi when it looked like she might be coming along. Okay, some see the battle between David and Goliath as a battle over which has dominance. So there's the physical world of Orpah and Goliath, and the spiritual world of Ruth and David. And that, my friends, is a very similar dynamic to what we're dealing with right now. Right? Ada's shaking her head. There is again in the world the opportunity for people to choose the side of good and holy and spiritual and godly, or the side of evil. And God is giving everybody the same chance. That some rabbis say that was the battle of David and Goliath, even though it ended with the death of Goliath, isn't really over yet. We're still repeating that same choice, hopefully for the last time. Okay. Orpah dies a violent death, kind of like the way that she lived. She dies at the hands of one of the generals of King David's army. And here's the story. Orpah lived a very long time because she was still alive when David was already king of Israel. And remember that David is the great grandson of her half sister. Okay. You with me? Okay. So here's the story according to the Talmud of how she dies. So one of Orpah's giant sons notices that King David has accidentally entered Philistine territory. And he recognizes him as the one who killed his brother Goliath, and he puts him in prison. Okay, so one of Orpah's surviving sons snatches King David and puts him in prison. King David's general, Abishai, has to go into enemy territory to rescue David. And on the way, he spots Orpah, and she is weaving at her spindle, at her loom. And Orpah, who at this point has been on the dark side for many, many, throws her loom at Abishai, intending to kill him, but she misses. And then she demands that Abishai returns her loom to her, and he understands that she means to kill him. And instead, he throws the loom at her, and he kills her. That's how her story ends. Okay. How are we supposed to understand that the rabbis have this unceasingly negative portrayal of Orpah? Did they condemn her because she rejected Naomi? She rejected the Israelite nation. She rejected the God of Israel. Is it meant as like a dramatic foil to highlight the purity of Ruth and the holiness of Ruth and the elevated choices that Ruth makes by joining along with God and his people? That's one way of understanding it. Okay. How they don't have anything nice to say about her from the moment she walks away until the moment that she is murdered in defense, at the hand of one of David's generals. Orpah represents, in rabbinic tradition, everything that's dark, and Ruth is only light and goodness. Orpah is promiscuous and murderous, and Ruth is this absolute paragon of virtue. Ruth joins the Israelites and is an ancestor to King David, and Orpah gives birth to Goliath and 3 other Philistine enemies of Israel. Ruth joins the nation that worships the God of Israel, and Orpah reverts to idolatry that is so severe that she's rejected by her own idolatrous nation. So they're portrayed as polar opposites. how are we supposed to understand Orpah's decision and her subsequent fall? Was it based on what I suggested before, that living a Torah life was too hard for her? She had been exposed to it for 10 years and she just didn't want to take on all that, Shabbat and kosher and all the rules. Was she drawn in some way to the idolatrous and Israel hating lifestyle of her native homeland? Was she fearful of leaving her homeland and starting over in a new country and a new culture when all she has is the mother of her dead husband and her half sister? Did she just feel a stronger connection to her own people and her own culture? Just to take you back to that moment on the road at this crucial moment of decision, standing together, Orpah is one moment away from the greatness of Ruth. She's at the moment of truth, ready to declare exactly as Ruth did, that she's prepared to join her, to leave her past world behind her, and to follow Naomi and to join the Israelite nation. But as we know, she folded, and the rabbis see her as someone who took the strength and potential for holiness and applied it instead to the dark side, okay, to the side of what we call in Hebrew tuma. So there's an idea in, and I'll finish with this, there's an idea in Torah that we might have spoken about this, but I'm going to say it again in this context, that something that has a potential for holiness within it has an equal and opposite potential for desecration. And the example that I usually use is human sexuality, because it's a clear example of this. Human sexuality can be a holy and elevating experience and has the potential to create new life, right? But on the opposite side, the exact same act can be degraded, and it can be sexual abuse, it can be rape, it can be pornography, whatever. So even if Orpah had the identical potential for greatness that Ruth had at that moment of decision, the fact that she made a different decision meant that her potential for greatness went to the negative side. And that's why she fell so low. So in a way, Orpah remained great in the sense of she remained a powerful woman all her life. She gave birth to these four powerful giants, but her power was directed in physicality instead of in spirituality. She had the potential to become spiritually great, to become a spiritual giant like Ruth, but her potential was directed instead toward giving birth to physical giants. And in this way, her story echoes the story of Esau. Esau was supposed to be, so you know that we have four mothers, right? Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, Sarah, Rachel, Rebecca, and Leah. And we have three forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? The fourth one was supposed to be Esau. He had that potential for spiritual greatness, but he chose to identify not with holiness, but with the negative. And that's also the path that Lot chose. Lot, whatever you call him, he was once not just the nephew of Abraham, but Abraham's chief student, his closest follower. He didn't just physically separate from Abraham, he chose to align with the wicked people of Sodom, leaving behind all the teachings of kindness, of hospitality that he learned in Abraham's world when he was connected. And so we see this again in Orpah. Orpah did not just separate from Naomi and go about her business. She returned to the roots of her nation and aligned with their wickedness, just as Lot did. And Lot was an ancestor, okay? Because remember, Lot, with his two daughters, one of his daughters gave birth to Moab, and Orpah is from the nation of Moab. So Orpah's story it's a sad tale. It's maybe even a morality play. And maybe the lesson here, and this is just my conjecture, just to conclude, that this is what becomes of a person who has a potential for spiritual greatness and rejects it. And that, my friends, is the backstory of the forgotten sister of Orpah. Okay.
Wow.
Oh, I love that reaction. Okay. We have a couple of minutes. If anybody has to go, you're welcome to do that. But if anybody Kelly, you're leaving, you got to go back to work. Okay. Thanks for joining us. All right. Does anybody want to unmute and comment or ask a question or give my voice a rest.
That was mind-blowing. Thank you so much, Rikva.
I'm very, very grateful that you're open to it. Natalie, you want to say something?
It's incredible.
Like you know, you were asking questions before for people who don't want to know about the background with the rabbi. I think we spoke about it sometime, and I know it's a very difficult wall, we say, to make crumble for the Christians. But what I try to say to the people is like that you have a history, and two things: that you have a history of people passing the story from, you know, that one and that one and that one, and sometimes people have lights coming to them that God give them more understanding of what's happening. And the third one, which is also a big one, is like if you dig in the Hebrew language and in the gematria and all of that, there is clues to make you understand what the rabbi have said. So they are not just saying it like just like that, boom. They have some very good reason to know, because they've done some research and they dig and gematria and, you know, a lot of different things.
It's
So
more than just that they did research. There is an oral tradition, right?
That's it.
So
this is the first things that they have to understand. But like trying to express, because like you have to try, I mean, obviously people need to be open. It's like you can't change the people. Again, they are making choices like Oprah. But I know by learning more that you can see sometime, oh, they knew that because of gematria. They knew that because a rabbi said to a rabbi to say to a rabbi, and they know that because they can see it. It's like if you read all the Bible with the Hebrew, looking at this and this and that, there is clue in other books sometimes, and suddenly you realize, oh, okay, that's it. This is the story, because they find out other thing in other books, which gave the big story if you put all the things together.
So I try to do that a little bit with you. I'm sorry to interrupt. I where I can say, you know, that's what this verse really means. Like in what I just taught you, that's why Goliath says to David this thing about, well, do you think I'm a dog?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So where I can make those connections for you to other verses in Tanakh, to other verses in Hebrew scripture, I try to do that. So you can see there's a basis for these ideas, and it helps other things go deeper.
Yes. But that's it. Everybody has to go on their path, and you know, I understand that for some Christian it's very hard, because they're like, oh, it's the Bible and only the Bible. Usually is the big thing that is said, and it's like, it's the Bible and only the Bible, but in different setting, in different ways. But you need to be open for that. Sometimes I say also, you know, like Emet has 70 faces. So you see only one part of the truth, but the other one sees also the other part of the truth, and it can see part that you don't see and that it can share to you, and it's bringing more of the Emet together. So again,
Emet, just for the rest, Emet means truth, in case you don't know that. Right. So we say that Shivim Panim LaTorah, the Torah has 70 faces. And one of the ways that I understand that is not everybody, the Torah is so deep and it's so complex. And I hope that in the times that we've been meeting, that you're getting even just a taste of that, like how rich this tradition is, and that some people come at it like they're fascinated by gematria, by the numerical values of words and how that makes this word relate to that word, and it reveals hidden meanings. Some people are interested in other pathways. Some people only study the Talmud. Some people focus all of their attention on the Bible, on different aspects of the Bible, on Parsha, on many, many different kinds of ways of approaching Torah, and they're all valid. It's just the Torah is bigger than any one approach. So I'm sharing with you my approach. This is the way that I learn. This is the way that I study. This is what animates Torah for me, is to learn more of the backstory, especially about the female characters. It's not enough. It's not enough just to read the plain, simple meaning of the Bible story. It's not enough for me. And I would argue that Christians have been deprived of this deeper understanding for a very long time. Margaret, I see you unmuted yourself. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as growing up Christian for me, and why your book is so intriguing, is you have to start with the premise that if you believe that the Jews are God's chosen people and that God spoke to them in Hebrew, and that you don't know Hebrew, your mind has to be open to some of the traditions to say, okay, if I'm connected to Jesus and he's supposed to be my savior and he was Jewish, and part of being a chosen means that there are secrets that that person would have that someone else who was outside of the family would not normally have known, would have to have been taught. So you have to, for me, it was a matter of challenging what I was taught, because either I can't believe that he was Hebrew and that he was part of the Jewish nation, but reject some of the traditions and just only pick and choose. Either I have to believe all of it and just have my mind open to embracing the part that I understand, or I have to believe none of it. So to me, I don't see where you can split the baby. And that's in my own consciousness where I had to come to that.
Right.
So
So it may be that the book is not, it's not going to be for all Christians. It is, I think I can help some people. And I think by virtue of the fact that you've been with me for the last number of months, most of you, and welcome to Brittany and Christy who are with us for the first time, but you're already willing to accept this other part of the story. But I know that this book is, and this way of studying is not, it's going to either offend or they're just not going to accept it. They're just going to say, if it's not in the Bible, I don't believe it. And I'm, all I can do is put it out there. So the book can speak to people like you who are open and who are, hopefully intrigued as I am by the fuller story than what we get in the biblical text alone. And that's just going to have to be the audience. I know I have to address it, but I love the way that Margaret, I maybe you can write that down for me and I can quote it in in the book when you talked about, like, if you believe that Jesus, Yeshua, came from the Jewish people, then it can't be that part of being a Christian is to reject everything that the Jewish people do and understand and so forth, right? So, okay, we're way over time, and this is a really important conversation for me. I don't want to keep anybody any longer. Does anybody have anything that you want to add to this before we go? You can talk to me privately later, but Kathy, maybe you want to say something? Since you're gonna unmute yourself here?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'd rather answer it in private because I've been making notes concerning your question about why Christians might have a problem with this. I can maybe share it because I've got witnesses. I think there's one part where Jesus says that he had a problem with some of the traditions in the way that the teachers of the law in his day interpreted Torah. And he came, I'm sorry, I'm really nervous saying this because I know it might be offensive, so please forgive me. But anyway, he said that some of the interpretations were not correct, like the washing of the hair, little details that are not really in the Torah, but that had been established as these traditions. And he expressly says that some of these things are not from my father. Sorry, that's what he said.
No, I
So-
understand. You can
So
speak.
that's why I think you might get a lot of antithesis to what you're trying to do from the Christian world. And then there's another thing I want to say, which is a huge shock to me. Sorry, I'm very emotional about this because this concerns my sister. And she married some guy now who's a Palestinian Christian. She was on this whole Torah path for a long time. And now with this new guy, I don't know, it's just not good. So anyway, he doesn't have a good opinion about Israel and what's going on with the war. And it's really quite poisonous and it's
Wow.
really, really affecting me. But anyway, so she sent me this video that was like very anti-Semitic and it really upset me, but it was basically about how the Talmud apparently has this real hate speech against Jesus. And then this guy does this whole study and interviews lecturers at universities. It's very constructed, but it's presented as truth. And maybe this kind of spirit is affecting Christians. They think that the Talmud is very anti-Yeshua, Jesus, and maybe that's why they also reject it.
Not only that, but maybe I said this to you guys, I don't know if I did, but that I heard from a Christian that I was teaching once that she was taught, and that this is apparently mainstream teaching, that the Talmud is full of witchcraft and sorcery and no, some of you look a little shocked. Maybe this is something, I don't know. And I almost fell off my chair because I had never heard that before, but now I've been around for a while, so I've heard a lot of the arguments, and what you said doesn't offend me and it doesn't shock me. I think that, I don't know, there was a conversation with someone in our group who was studying Talmud, and I don't know if you remember this conversation, if you were in the group even back then. It was pretty early on. And I suggested to her that it's not a good idea for non-Jews to study Talmud because it is very complex material and very easy to take things out of context and to misunderstand. Anyway, she subsequently left the group. We haven't seen her since the very beginning, I guess. And I actually reached out to her. She might have blocked me, I'm not sure. I reached out to her to try to say, we can disagree about this and I may not be the right teacher for you. But I just wanted to clear the air on a personal level. But anyway, I never heard back from her. So I totally get that. And I still think that what I gave you tonight is actually straight out of one of the chapters that I finished from the book. So you see where I'm going with this. And if you're if your soul is open to this kind of teaching, and if I'm happy to continue to share, and your encouragement has pushed me to revisit this book and to share this with you, because I think that you guys are the ideal audience for it. But if what I've shared here and what I've been sharing, I guess if it's horrifying to you in some way, you wouldn't still be spending time with me every Tuesday. Anyway, I'm happy to hear anything else that you guys say. I want to be respectful of your time and finish up for today. Let me just ask, does anybody have any burning thing that you feel like you want to say before I finish up? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much for the privilege of being with you. And God willing, I'll see you next week. Bye now.